else from across the globe. From here, Malawi, government officials here present, our dear partners, including Feminist Economic Alliance Malawi, Malawi Healthy Equity Network, Civil Society Agriculture Network, Civil Education Coalition, members of the press, Fair Action Aid member staff from all over the Federation. Malawi is pleased to participate and contribute to this very important conversation, the public versus austerity. As a citizen from the least developed country, I say with passion and without fear that the need to overhaul the framework for economic management in Malawi is urgent. For over 30 years now, neoliberal economic reforms in Malawi have taken many shapes as guised and have worked to undermine the capacities of the state and the people to effectively pursue developmental outcomes. Freezing the recruitment of staff in the civil service has resulted into teacher-pupil ratio highly increased. Currently, in some schools, we have up to 1 to 120 pupils per teacher. In health, we have a very big brain drain, where most of the doctors migrate to the west in search for greener pastures. In agriculture, people in the rural farmers are unable to access agriculture extension services, resulting into poor yields and hunger, which has become perpetual in a country like Malawi. Public sector wage bill restrains all these packages that are supposed to be provided to the citizens of the country. And as a result, there's been undermined confidence between the state as well as the citizens. ActionAid Malawi and partners therefore support the launch of the report, The Public versus Austerity, as it enforces feminist macroeconomic alliance call to push for inclusive and gender transformative economies in the delivery of public services in health, in education, and in agriculture. I therefore, ladies and gentlemen, wish to a successful discussion at this important event and welcome the voice of fellow Malawians on the issue of the public versus austerity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rodney, for providing those welcoming remarks. At this point in time, I'd like to invite Mr. Increment Ndiobanda, who is going to shed more light on what Malawi findings have been in as far as austerity measures is concerned, and in particular, public sector wage bill cuts in Malawi. What are the findings and what are the gender impacts on women? Thank you so much, Increment.
Thank you, Chiku. I'll be presenting just a synopsis of the study that was conducted in Malawi and what are the key issues emerging from the research. In Malawi, public sector wage bill restraints were adopted by government of Malawi in 2005 under the Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility of the International Monetary Fund and are presently implemented under the Extended Credit Facility. The agreement has been to maintain a modest public sector wage bill that falls below 25% of the annual budget and not more than 8% of the gross domestic product. The overarching objective has been to achieve macroeconomic stability as well as a prudent distribution of financial resources in the country's annual budget. And in order to operationalize this, three main wage bill restraints have been adopted by the government of Malawi, and these are salary freeze, recruitment freeze, and promotion freeze. So I'll take you through each one of these just to share a bit of details around the same. Now, in order to manage the wage bill, government has resorted to freezing the recruitment on new personnel into the public service. Now, this has precipitated staffing crisis as the as the vacancy rates across the three sectors, and the three sectors we talk about are education, health, and the agriculture, to be what I was saying is this has resulted in staffing crisis at the vacancy rates across the three sectors is actually very high, and it has compromised the quality of services available to the public. So presently, qualified teacher pupil ratio in government primary schools stands at 1 to 67 learners, which is higher than the recommended global ratio of 1 to 40. However, this actually obscures the high ratio, particularly in lower classes of rural primary schools, it averages around 1 to 98 learners, owing to high enrollment rates before the pupil starts dropping out. So while the average seems to suggest that it is 1 to 67, but in the lower grades, the ratio is actually worse. And recruitment freezes also has ended up depriving employment opportunities to prospective civil servants, especially women who dominate the nursing and primary school teaching professions. In both education and health sectors, serving frontline workers have attempted to force the government to hire individuals who have just graduated from different training schools, including the medical and teaching schools, by holding industrial actions, which in their own right have detrimental impacts on service delivery in the short term. However, government has grown cold feet owing to wage bill constraints in line with its agreement with the International Monetary Fund. Just to share a bit of detail also on the delayed or frozen promotions. From this perspective, frozen or delayed promotions have resulted in a public service that has a disproportionately high number of women in low-ranking positions, allowing only very small and slow upward movement for staff. This has mutated fiercely against gender equality, aspirations of having at least 40% of women in decision-making positions as is required under Section 11 of the Gender Equality Act. At the same time, this has reinforced the notion that management of Malawi's public service is male-dominated. In relation to the third point, which is around recruitment or salary freeze, over the past 10 years, the public sector wage bill has been revised upwards by a nominal 27%. However, this has coincided with an increase in the cost of living, which has averaged around 15%, and that's effectively reducing the real growth in the public sector wage bill to a mere 10%. As a result, civil servants report that the current salaries are inadequate and resort to coping mechanisms that have detrimental bearing on the quality of public services that are delivered to the general public. The mechanisms which they have adopted include moonlighting, prioritizing to attend meetings that yield them extra allowances, but they also devote much of their time towards moonlighting or part-time works. The members of the public cannot afford public or private services that are offered in the private facilities where the public servants are actually taking part-time jobs. And this leaves the public service with substandard services, and this continues to affect the quality of services that public the public can access. And by effecting salary freezes, public servants do not have many options to diversify their income, and notably women are subjected to poor conditions that fall short of principles of decent work. As such, we would want to make a few statements of asking for change in these areas. As the report has identified key policy gatekeepers, which we would want to engage and target for advocacy, so that we can break or modify the framework for managing public sector wage bill. And we will be engaging with these key stakeholders, including the Minister of Finance, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, members of Parliament, and we are lucky to have the chairperson of the Budget and Finance Committee in Parliament. We'll be engaging the political parties as well as the President himself. And the report further recommends taking advantage of the credit facility mission that are in country, that we can already begin to engage on these issues with them. With these remarks, let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Increment, for providing those insights into what the findings from Malawi are on the study. At this point in time, we would like to invite Dr. Jessica Miller, who is going to bring in Pan-African feminist lens on what this study means to women, and in particular women in the African continent. Thank you so much. It's your time, Honorable.
Thank you very much. I just want to check that I'm audible to everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Firstly, it's good to see comrades who have been in this field for a long time, both virtually and in this room. I'm starting from this note because I think the title, The Public versus Austerity. I'll start by saying, when you see the word public, please see 52% of women in that public. So the question is, why is austerity a feminist question? Why is austerity an issue that needs a gender lens? The issue is very simple. If someone was to ask us, what happens when the public meets austerity measures? The truth of the matter is the public, majority of those who are poor are women, loses and actually dies. Why am I saying the public that is poor cannot win? It's very simple. Austerity measures actually are stifling service delivery. Not just service delivery, but gendered service delivery. And when that gets, when social protection is being done minimally and it is not reaching the poor, the truth of the matter is people die. So we are seated here and this research is actually showing us that when we look at the rules that are coming from neoliberalism through the Bretton Woods institutions, the truth of the matter is that education and health are really suffering. Why are these key issues? We cannot fight ending child marriage. We cannot fight ending COVID impacts. We cannot talk about ending teen marriages if people are not well educated, especially women, if they are not well educated. And in fact, research shows that when the poor, even the men, are well educated, they are better handled to not to participate in gender-based violence, to actually be able to hold government accountable more. But where we are, as long as there are these budget cuts and we are being told that the wage bill has to be this size, what that means is we are condemning the poor to being uneducated, to serious numbers of illiteracy, to not accessing health. Now, when you're fighting a disease, as a pandemic as horrendous as COVID-19, it's as good as sentencing a whole nation to death, because what you're saying is, it's better for you to build buildings. You know, there's this serious obsession with putting up infrastructure. And as I'm talking, I'm seeing that even here in Malawi, yeah, we are quite happy that roads are getting constructed and we are getting buildings here and there. But the question is, what are we doing in terms of health? What are we doing? If we're setting up to policies that say health cannot be taken care of, then maybe the question we should be asking ourselves, why is it that we are happy with what in feminist language would say phallic symbols of development rather than the ones that are health? And I'm telling you, if you look at people who are trying to show what they've achieved in development, a tall building is a very good symbol of what you've attained, you know. But if each tall building is matched with so many people dead or jobless or not educated, I do not know what Malawi is going to choose. In other words, what I'm saying is this infrastructure obsession needs to be gendered in terms of how many lives have we saved in terms of investing in health. And investing in health starts by the policies that we accept. To be honest, IMF policies, and they were here just a week back. And you know, listening to the language, the speak that was coming out, it was very clear that we are still measuring development in terms of GDP, not in terms of care that people desperately need during a COVID-19 pandemic and during an Africa that has had to do neoliberal developments forever. I just want to give you a highlight. In the past 3 months, Malawi has lost 103 people to mental health, to suicide. Now, if you go to our budget and you find out how much have we put on mental health, you will actually find that we have not put anything. And to me, that's a direct response of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism does not worry about the person who produces the tax, the one who's going to repay the money that they are going to talk about. What is more important is we should service debt. There is this weird logic. I think the research, if you look at the research that has been done, it has actually seen that neoliberalism is selling this logic that you have to cut spending on people so that you can spend on them. Now, that's an oxymoron. Doesn't even make sense. How do you cut spending on people so that you can spend on them? By the time you turn around to spend on them, let me say they'll be dead. As simple as all that. And the majority that will die is actually the poor, majority of whom are young people and women. So the lens that I'm bringing into the public versus austerity is that, honestly, it's time women movements, youth movements stood up. This thing will not go away on its own. We need to actually get up and articulate what is going on. I'm not going to say much in terms of what the youth should do because I've got a very able, I don't want to say young feminist because then that makes me an older feminist. No, I'm not in the mood to be talking about the ages. I think I feel very young today. But I mean, the young feminist who is here will be very, very much able to do it. My issue is simple. Unless and until parliaments, at district level, in the councils, our curricula in the education sector, our chiefs in the social sector, and the person in the street understands that neoliberalism or the word austerity just means let's kill. It's institutionalization of the killing of people who need social services, social protection, education, and health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Kabila, for those statements. At this point in time, I'd like to cross over to the government. We have the chairperson in here, Honorable Bragaza, who is the chairperson of Finance Committee from Parliament. And very quickly, I would like to hear your sentiments and your response on the report, Honorable Bragaza. Thank you.
Thank you so much for recognizing Malawi National Assembly through the chair of Budget and Finance Committee, who is myself. Distinguished delegates from all parts of the world, government officials here present, although I'm not seeing anyone from Malawi government here, from the executive arm of government, civil society representatives, members of the press, and organizers of this event, that's including Action Aid. Greetings from the National Assembly. On behalf of Malawi Parliament, and indeed on my own behalf, I'd like to say thank you, organizers, for inviting us to this conversation. We are pleased to participate in this important conversation on the need to strengthen public services sector. We are all aware that public services are at the core of democratic societies founded on human rights, the rule of law, and social solidarity. And we all know that the poor public service delivery results in serious violations of people's rights. That is why I'm also equally shocked with the results of the research that has exposed how austerity cuts in just a few countries, and we've started with Malawi, has blocked the recruitment of public workers, including nurses, midwives, teachers, agriculture extension workers, and other essential public sector workers. Distinguished participants, the findings shared today reveal how deeply public sector wage bill restraints result in serious violations of human rights for its citizens. And as a lawmaker myself, I do understand how important human rights are, and I know that human rights are the law, and we have to live by the law. Therefore, as the chairperson of the Budget and Finance Committee of Parliament, I want to close my remarks by committing to take action, to engage my fellow parliamentarians, and to provide effective oversight role to the executive arm of the government, in particular the Ministry of Finance, to safeguard the legal duty of government in respecting, protecting, and also fulfilling people's human rights. And also employment is one key area of human rights. Our many youth, and one is sitting next to me, have and are being trained in various professional skills like nursing, midwifery, teaching, and these productive youths are disadvantaged as compared to security trained youth. You will see that when the police train their youth, when the army train their youth, and even in immigration train their youth, they are quickly employed after the training. But if you look today at the nurses, midwives, they finish their education, but there is no job for them. This is an anomaly that has to be rectified. And I also, let me take also this opportunity to share this. Just last Thursday, that's October 7th, the Malawi Nurses Council had an ad hoc meeting to review whether to keep training midwives, assistants, who graduate with a certificate after 3 semesters. The meeting had observed that midwives are not getting employed after getting the training. And the council was of the opinion that they should probably just stop training the midwives as we speak. Madam Moderator, I am pleased to advise that the council, initially they wanted to suspend the course, but now the council has agreed to keep offering the training and encourage the graduates to look for employment. But there's something that we need to do about this. We cannot just let our graduates be trained, professionals, nurses, teachers, and whoever be trained and not find employment. There's something that we need to do. So we'll engage with government. We've gotten that. The parliament sitting is coming, is around the corner. It will be soon. We'll engage with government and also to find out ways of how we can best handle that. You also agree with me that IPTE programs have been facing serious challenges as well, where graduates, that's teachers, have left in the villages before being employed by the government, which trained them. So the government is spending money. We are putting money in our budget to train the teachers, and yet we are not employing the teachers themselves. So these are just a few examples that are happening. And as MPs, we are also not happy with the development, and I can assure you that we will do a lot to lobby with government to ensure that they get employment. We need to follow up and monitor that the Malawi government makes right macroeconomic policy choices and decisions that can enhance effective public service delivery. Our hospitals, you are already aware, need adequate medical supplies. Our animal depots, we need to stock various produce like maize. so that our poor Malawians access maize at a better price as compared to the exorbitant vendor prices. Now, let's call the police themselves and the prison staff welfare. You see that it's so pathetic. We can hardly expect good service delivery from these officers if they're not looked after well. Therefore, there is a lot we need to do, but we cannot do it alone. We need some help from the government, of course, when coming out with the budget, but also from the civil society. Let me also take this moment to say this. Sometimes the government, even the MPs in parliament, they also may notice that there is a policy of the government that is not good for Malawians. But because of the numbers that are in parliament, because it's too political, you notice that you're taking to, you're voting against something or for something just because you're in majority. Therefore, it's high time now that Malawians, especially MPs, now be able to lobby on a professional basis and not on a partisan basis. That's the only way we can move our country forward. And I say thank you once again for giving me that time, and also looking forward to working more with Action Aid in the future to make sure that we deliver on our goal that we want to achieve at the end of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Ganda, for those remarks. Beautiful remarks on the role of government, in particular the role of parliament to provide checks and balances in terms of the type of macroeconomic policy framework that Malawi is using. Very quickly, I want to close by inviting Youth Activista from Malawi Activista Network for their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiku. My name is Jessica Mandanda, a member of the Activista Youth Network, as well as the platform coordinator and co-lead for the Art for Her project under Activista. The Art for Her project is a platform that is harnessing the creative energy of young artists to address the state of young people as a result of macroeconomic decisions by the Malawi government. This includes the use of digital illustrations and poetry, as we'll see in this presentation. Over the years, young people in Malawi have lived and continue to live while negotiating the consequences of neoliberalism and acceptance of austerity policies by the Malawi government, which leads to public sector cuts which severely affect young people in Malawi. For example, unemployment rates in Malawi continue to haunt young people as we try to negotiate the expensive cost of living, which is still rising, and the Malawian government's inability to absorb graduates into the workforce. Speaking further to this, we have structures and programs such as the government internship program that was meant to be a source of empowerment and training for young people. However, this has become a ploy to distract the Malawian population from government's failure to properly induct young graduates into the public service, therefore leaving young people to choose between unemployment and 3-year internships, which are accompanied by tremendous workloads, poor pay and exposure to exploitation, and for many women, this includes sexual harassment, and there are no proper protection structures. As young people in Malawi, we are aware of the effects of austerity, and we are equipped and ready to proactively and actively hold our government accountable, because quite frankly, we are tired of patriarchal governments who function on neoliberalism. As mentioned, one way has been through Art for Her, where we're using arts to spotlight how austerity is affecting us as young people, such as the illustrations that we have seen here, and now the poem that I'll introduce, which has been done by one of the artists in the Art for Her project, who is Marumbo. I invite you to enjoy the poem.
Hello, my name is Marumbo from Malawi, and I'll be reading out a poem for you. As if being poor isn't enough, one must live with the burden of being told how to live, because sometimes being poor and unwise are synonyms. Sometimes being alive is a burden too heavy to carry, but in this life, 2 things are guaranteed. Well, these days 3, death, taxes, and these days the scratching of the virtual itch of those that feel bad for us for being poor and are here to offer us solutions that do us no good but keep us in the same cycle of being poor. We have the picture-perfect figurines placed in the hands of those that watch over us, and we remain that tick, that parasite that lives off of them and causes them to scratch that itch, so they scratch some more so that they can satisfy that itch, that desire, that God complex. We pay high taxes to have less teachers and nurses and doctors. I wonder how we will grow. The greed of the people is fed by the justifications that their pay is too low. I wonder whether the cart is before the cow, or the cash cow is just delivering sour milk, or the people are being forced to stop working and thinking on ways on how they can figure out how to solve their allowance and trip outside of the city limits problem, and yet no growth happens. Businesses labored with taxes and impositions, servicing an unemployed and underpaid population, then back to borrow more money at rates they cannot sustain, and the cycle goes again and again and again. This is the merry-go-round of life, but how many of us are merry? And how many of us are just going round and round? Is the government for the people? Are the people the government? Do the policies govern the people? Is this for their good? Who knows? But what we do know is that the public sector is a necessary player in public growth. And so as we move from parasite to prey to preacher to the blessed and those that can host themselves and others to being the bread baskets we once were, we pray that our voices will be heard and that the herd of our cash cows will go before the cart so that we can finally start to move forward again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marumbo. And at this point in time, I'd like to cross over to Zimbabwe and pass over the modulation law to my colleague, Increment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's what we heard from Malawi. At this point, we will cross to Zimbabwe, which is part of East and Southern Africa. And kicking us out is Lumbidzai Makomi. I hope you're ready to take us through. Over to you, Lumbi.
Thank you very much. A good morning, good afternoon to everybody in the meeting. So ours is really just a reflection of the findings that we had from the research in Zimbabwe. And, in a world where most countries are battling with how IMF austerity is hindering the public sector wage bill, especially that of the health and education sectors, Zimbabwe finds itself in a peculiar situation because of its macroeconomic environment. The volatility of our currency, which government actually uses to remunerate civil servants, further worsens the vulnerabilities. For example, there was a general noticeable upward trend in the average total annual earnings by workers in the education sector over the periods 2010 to 2019. However, this trend was abruptly cut off in 2019 when the currency distortions began to manifest. So if you follow Zimbabwean economics, this is when we had the $1 is equal to 1 Zimbabwean dollar, which was of course not the obtaining on the ground. And the public servants kept being paid in Zim dollars and expecting to function in a US dollar economy. The payment framework in local currency was no longer resembling what was obtaining during the dollarization period. In the past 24 or so months, we have also witnessed an increase in the workload for nurses as frontline defenders in the fight against COVID-19. Although reports showed an incommensurate remuneration system, there were talks of allowances, COVID-19 allowances, but these were also fraught by other demands that the government had made to say, if you do not get vaccinated, if you choose not to get vaccinated, then you will not receive these compensations. So teachers and nurses are continuously being squeezed into a very, very hard space because of these austerity measures. And it's against this background that ActionAid Zimbabwe chose to participate in the public versus austerity research that was implemented by ActionAid International in 15 countries. To set the context, there is a consensus that the earnings of public workers in the education and health sectors are generally low compared to other sectors. So in the whole public service system, you'll find that probably there's more money that goes to defense and less money going to care sectors such as education and health. Based on sentiments from representatives of the workers in the two sectors, the main concern that we found in the research was that current remuneration frameworks are generally lower in US dollar terms than what used to obtain during the government of national unity. You will remember that the shift that happened in 2019 as a result of the dollarization. So an evolution of the earnings for workers in these two sectors would help bring in the right picture. In June 2021, the government effected a salary increment for civil servants, which would see the teacher and the nurse in the lowest grade, that is D1, getting about 28,666 Zim dollars. And this is equivalent to anything between 239 to 335 US dollars. 239 being the most realistic because this is the parallel market which is predominantly used in the country. This is against a total consumption poverty line for Zimbabwe that was $29,874 for a family of 5. So you'll see that the gap here between the poverty line and what the teacher is getting is merely about 1,000 Zimbabwean dollars, which is less than $10. Given such statistics, it's clear to see that the austerity measures are sinking teachers and nurses deeper into poverty. The government continues to push for capital expenditure over recurrent expenditure. Just like what we have heard from Malawi, to say there's a lot of push towards let's do more capital intensive expenditure. Funny enough, the capital expenditure is not even in the health and education sectors, but in road infrastructure and in other male-dominated sectors. This really has a gendered face, and I think it's been a long time coming. We know that poverty wears a female face, and in this instance, it is really apparent and it is really in our faces to say there is lack of support for the care economies that women are most participative in, pushing more funds into the male-dominated sectors such as construction. So we also try to see how then decisions or negotiations around salaries being done in Zimbabwe, and the legislation around that in itself is stifling for the civil servants, because you'll find that the powers to increase or reduce salaries, they lie within the apex, and ultimately they lie with the president. So if the government is for capital expenditure and against recurrent expenditure, the teachers and the nurses in the country continue to suffer because any negotiations will be futile. We have teachers' unions that have produced numerous position papers, but these have really fallen on deaf ears. And one other really worrying fact, or one other prevailing scenario, is that the discussions that IMF and the government have are usually held behind closed doors. So there's not much information that is left to civil society, to pressure groups, to use to advocate and influence the public sector wage bill. It's always something that then comes to the public domain as cast in stone. One major recommendation from the report was to say that an urgent relook at Zimbabwe's policy positions regarding austerity is very important and essential to build back better, both in the education and in the health sectors. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Lubizai, for those sentiments. Quite interesting and very strong recommendations as well as that you have made. At this point in time, we want to hear from PSI, and we will be hearing from the Sub-Regional Secretary for Africa, and this is Everine Akech. Over to you. I hope you're online.
I'm actually online. Are you getting me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I also want to join other speakers in terms of appreciating both PSI, Education International, and Action Aid for this rich research. And just as echoed by the previous speakers, the issue of austerity for the last 40 years has actually caused a greater negative impact in terms of not only public service delivery, but also the quality of life of the people within the various countries. Now, I want to get some few examples. For instance, in Kenya, recently, IMF actually gave a directive that there should be no pay rise or wage freeze for almost next 5 years. The challenge is that a number of trade unions who are working in the public sector had already signed a collective bargaining agreement with the Salary Review Commission in terms of enhancing the salary. And the moment this directive came out, it means that IMF is actually pitting the government against its own citizens, which is not acceptable. In addition to this, we realized that even during this COVID-19 pandemic, a number of health workers were not able to get their salary increment or even their risk allowances, among others, which resulted in a number of them going on strike. And what is the implication of that, especially in a time where the management of COVID-19 is very critical? It simply shows that you are dealing with Bretton Woods organizations who are not conscious about people. We should never forget one thing, that public services is one way for the government to redistribute wealth between the rich and the poor. And as noted by the speakers both from Malawi and Zimbabwe, every time the public services are not adequate, the people who suffer are actually women and children. I've seen a number of cases during this COVID-19, especially in health centers or public hospitals, where the patient to staff ratios are actually quite high. That sometimes many of these health workers were being forced to go through challenges of mental health, a lot of fatigue, among others. And so what is our role as trade unions in terms of fighting austerity measures? We have a responsibility, just as highlighted by David in the first session, to actually call upon our governments to really put people first over structures, over issues of austerity. Because every time you put people at the center of your governance, because every government has got a contract, what we refer to as social contracts, between ourselves and our citizens, then you'll be able to actually develop policies that are pro-people. So as labor unions, we believe that we have the power, because we have the numbers, to be able to call upon our governments to consider policies which are pro-people. We also have the responsibility to rally the communities, whether in private sector, whether the community themselves, whether civil societies, to be able to stand up and actually call and hold their governments to account in terms of developing policies that are pro-people and not for privatization. Then we also realize that we've had a number of challenges in terms of recruitment ban. And this is one area that I believe as trade unions, we are able to negotiate with the government. What is quite surprising is that while IMF and World Bank bring on board or impose austerity upon the nations, they never factor in that the population growth has not stagnated. For instance, if you look at Uganda, we have one of the highest population growth rates in the world. However, the population growth is not matched with the quality of public services provided, including the number of staffing in various sectors, whether talk about education, talk about health itself, talk about other public services like local government, among others, to be able to provide services that meet the expectation and enhances the welfare of the community. So I want to join all the other speakers in terms of encouraging the labor fraternity and also the civil society. We have the power, the country belongs to the people. I've always used a good example of Nigeria. When they introduced the VAT way back in the 1990s, they refused as a country or citizens to have the VAT rate that many of us currently have, that is value added tax, at the rate of either 18%, 15%, and they still have one of the lowest VAT rates in Africa, that it goes at around 6%. What made the difference is they came out together as a community, as a nation, to tell IMF, this will not work for us. And nobody's going to do it for us if we don't stand up and mobilize the entire community to actually tell the IMF and World Bank that some of these austerity measures are only hurting the women, they are hurting the climate. So we have that responsibility as labor fraternity, but also as civil society and other progressive feminist organizations. Thank you so much.
Very interesting comments. Thank you, Akechi. Very interesting comments that you've shared with us. The country belongs to the people, and if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do for us. Thank you for that input. At this time, we'll continue to hear from Public Sector International, and this time we are hearing from San Baba, who happens to be the Regional Secretary for Africa and Arab countries. Over to you, San. San Baba, can you hear us?
Hello, trying to connect.
Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, brothers and sisters. I'm happy to be part of this discussion, even though most of the issues have really been touched by colleagues, especially those that spoke from Asia and also Evelyn. They have touched virtually on most of these areas that have centered clearly on the impacts of austerity in our numerous sectors that we operate as Public Services International. Many of us actually grew up to meet some of these policies quoted in so many names, and we're still dealing with them in a very bitter way. We were told, like you all know, were adopted and swallowed, meant to be swallowed to better the lives of the living. But in them, we have been actually seeing so many contrary things and contradictions in Africa. Especially. Like we all know, structural adjustment program was so popular in so many countries like Nigeria, even though they were rejected initially when they were introduced by various governments being harsh policies. And the sectors that we all know that are really badly affected are sectors that we operate as Public Services International. And some of these areas have actually been touched by previous speakers. Here in particular, I'm talking about the health sector, which has faced a lot of decaying infrastructures, the workload on the part of our workers, and the migration of health workers, which has actually affected services that we render to the services. And of course, gender-based violence issues are really issues which has affected the sector. And what we have seen clearly now with the emergence of volunteers in the system that have not actually been able to meet the needs of the people. All these are as a result of introduction of austerity measures that affected the health sector. So also the utilities, water and energy, which has faced serious effect of privatization and lack of gender equity, low coverage to areas where they needed these services, and of course, poor services due to less funding. Then of course, like we mentioned, municipalities, we have seen very clearly political interferences, reduction of funding, which affects the community to the larger extent. And like we all know, salaries of workers have not been paid in some countries, in some places for 7 months and even 13 months. Then education, as mentioned by also Malawi, we have seen the advent of privatization of public education institutions, where people are being forced to withdraw their children from public to private schools. And we are now seeing the emergence of mushroom institutions, and even where teachers have really left the services or killed as a result of conflict in the areas like in the northeast of Nigeria. We have not seen replacements of over the years. So really governments are really happy when workers leave or they retire. They find it very comfortable not to replace such a vacuum in the civil service or in the municipalities. The regional governments have also suffered the same problem, no employment, like I mentioned, outsourcing also of revenue collection, and also the freeze of wages, promotions, and even the embargo on employment. All these based on the argument that there's no fund, and also government has to cut expenses to employ or recruit people so that they can provide services. Over the years, we have also seen the politics around minimum wage and pensions, where the minimum wage being enjoyed by workers in the public service, nothing to write home about now, especially with the currency devaluation, and even pension have been diverted to serve political purposes. So, and the worst scenario, like mentioned by Evelyn and many others, we have seen clearly the outbreak of Ebola, cholera, and COVID-19, which have so far exposed our systems to laughing stock. The infrastructure is lacking. Workers are not there. We have seen the videos expressed by Ghana and also Nigeria. The workers are not there to serve the community, and the workload is also there. They are not being well paid, and no motivation. And even nurses over the last couple of months, many nurses have left Nigeria. Over 7,000 have left, migrated to other countries. And we have seen also how doctors are leaving to Saudi Arabia, where they think they can earn better pay. And this affects actually the quality of services that are being provided at the country level. So I think many things have been said, and not to repeat them. I want to really quickly move to the way forward. And I think it's important for us, like the way we started collaboration with similar organizations, civil society organizations, trade unions, and friendly organizations to work against imposed policies, I mean, bad policies within that are really being imposed on us and introduced by our various governments. And we should also promote popular alternative policies based on the needs of the people and also realities on the ground. And we should hold our governments accountable. I mentioned by key speakers when we had the Asia session in the morning, also the colleagues that spoke from Malawi, we should be able to hold our governments accountable so that at least whatever action they take, they should be made to explain to the people, but our input should always be taken on board so that at least we should continue to serve the community and the general
Your line is breaking. We can't hear you.
Thank you for giving me the time. Comments. Thank you.
Thank you, San Baba. We couldn't hear the last part. We couldn't hear some statements that you made towards the end, but I think that's fine. I am hoping we have picked the key issues from your contributions. I think encouraging us to hold governments accountable, but also promoting people-focused policies that are going to serve the interests of the public. So thank you so much. I have the pleasure to introduce Dennis Snyoro, who happens to be the Chief Regional Coordinator for Africa at Education International. He is our next speaker and he wants to share with us their perspective of austerity. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks to our partners, ActionAid and Public Services International. We are privileged to have worked together on this very important project, culminating in the study we are launching today, both globally and regionally. Colleagues, this study we are launching today confirms what we at EI have been saying all along, and indeed what you have been saying. That the policy international financial. Thank you. It confirms what we've been saying, that the policies of international financial institutions undermine public services. They undermine the education and health systems of developing countries. They inhibit human and economic growth. Africa, as many of you have said, has borne the brunt of the lending conditionalities of the IMF and the World Bank. For example, the structural adjustment programs of the 1980s and 1990s discouraged African governments from training teachers. Can you believe it? They were claiming that everyone can teach. Can you believe it? Yes, they did. And they also claimed that a class size of up to 60 students did not make a difference in terms of learning outcomes. But we know it does. And of course, they do too. That is why they do not take their own children to schools with large class sizes. And that is why they don't take their own children to schools without qualified teachers. But they want you in developing countries, you and I in Africa and other parts of the world, in the developing world, to have our children taught in under-resourced schools without qualified teachers. Colleagues, unfortunately, the legacy of the policies of the IMF and the World Bank and others remains. Many African countries are still without enough trained and qualified teachers. They haven't recovered from those conditionalities that were imposed on them in the 80s and 90s. For example, data from UNESCO Institute for Statistics reveal that 70% of countries in Africa face teacher shortages at primary level and 90% at secondary school level. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa need to recruit 17 million primary and secondary school teachers to achieve the 4th Sustainable Development Goal on quality education by 2030. The IMF imposed caps on public expenditure and the wage bill make it difficult or even impossible for recipient countries to invest more domestic resources in education and teachers. Budget caps have made it difficult for many developing countries to train, recruit, and retain qualified teachers. EI has just completed 4 country case studies in Nepal, Malawi, Senegal, and Zambia, documenting the experiences of teachers from the front line, from the classroom. You will soon be hearing, just briefly from Limbani about experiences from Malawi. I know I've heard a lot about Malawi. You will at least hear the perspective of teachers from Malawi. But let me tell you a little bit about Zambia. In Zambia, for example, the wage bill caps have impacted negatively on collective bargaining, and they have led to stagnation in teacher salaries. This is not unique to Zambia. We saw unilateral decisions to suspend collective bargaining agreements in South Africa and in Kenya. So these are the challenges that we see across several countries. For example, class sizes in Zambia now range between 80 and 120 students, 80 and 120. That's enormous. You can't, as a teacher, attend to the individual needs of your students. Workload has increased 4 times. Just imagine. International financial institutions also portray and support private provision of education as a panacea for the challenges related to quality and access, particularly for the most marginalized. They promote privatization and commercialization of education, competition, and standardized testing or assessment with the mistaken belief that these measures will help drive quality. Yet they often lead to narrowing of the curriculum and exclusion. Countries that achieve quality with equity, including gender equality, invest in strong public education systems. As we launch the public versus austerity research today, colleagues, we urge African governments. We have government officials with us today, members of parliament. Thank you for joining us. We urge you and governments to reject the negative policies and lending conditionalities of the IMF. The Asian tigers rejected the policies of the IMF. And where are they today? They have made tremendous progress in development. The money that goes into education is not an expense, but it is an investment in our children and youth, which is our best resource in Africa today. The IMF should listen to the facts. If they can't listen to us, at least they should listen to the facts, to research evidence like we're providing through this study today, and take immediate and concrete measures to change their policies, to change direction. They can, they did. At the end of the 90s, remember that in the 90s, they were telling governments to introduce user fees. Even those governments that had free primary education, they were told, no, you can't afford it, introduce fees. Zimbabwe was advised to introduce fees in the early 90s. Can you imagine? They made a U-turn 10 years later and said, oh, yeah, abolishing user fees will actually ensure more children come to school, including the most marginalized. Of course, that's what we were saying before. So they cannot say they can't change their policies. They've changed before, so they can change even now. They should look at the evidence and change. They should listen to the workers, to the teachers, to the healthcare workers, and everybody. They should listen to civil society. They should listen to NGOs, to students, to parents, and everybody else that has been suffering because of their policies. Friends, a better Africa, the Africa we want, as articulated in Agenda 2063 of the African Union and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is possible. But it is only and only possible if the IMF can allow our public services, such as education and health, to breathe. Thank you very much.
Wow. Beautiful and very inspiring, Daniel. Signor Dennis, thank you for sharing your perspective and calling upon IMF to listen to the facts from the teachers, from the learners, from the civil society, as the consequences of their policies we are still yet to recover from. We continue to suffer from the policies, the conditionalities that we've been subjected to. At this point in time, allow me to introduce Limbali Nsapato, who happens to be the researcher from Malawi, but also speaking to the issues raised by Education International. Limbali Nsapato, over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Also to share the table with regard to the subject of austerity measures. I want to join my colleague, Dr. Dennis Signoro, indeed, in accepting that as a world, we have to resist the measures that are brought about by IMF and other international institutions. After conducting a research here in Malawi on behalf of Education International, indeed my take is that education is being sacrificed at the altar of these austerity measures and policies of the IMF, the World Bank, and other international supporters. These policies must be rebuked. These policies must be resisted. These policies must be killed at a new altar of human rights, justice, and the sustainable development goals. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because in Malawi, the education sector is suffering a lot. Just to agree with the colleagues earlier on, especially Honorable Kabwira, who mentioned earlier, that if you go into our schools, Malawi is one of the countries where you have an acute shortage of teachers. It has the highest teacher-pupil ratio. And as at now, even though we have 5.4 million children in primary schools, we only have 83,000 teachers. And for the country to be able to achieve the teacher-pupil ratio of 1 to 40, we need to recruit at least 52,000 teachers. And now, as we speak, the country cannot recruit teachers. Everyone in Malawi is knocking on the door of the Ministry of Education, which is unable to recruit at least 8,000 teachers from cohort 13 and 14 of trained teachers, but who have no job. And yet government cannot recruit these. And just last week, the Minister of Education issued a statement to say, well, we would like to enroll more trainees in our cohort 17, but then there is no guarantee that after being enrolled and trained, you'll get a job. This is contradictory. Why should you train people just to keep them without a job? And right now we are talking of a COVID-19 situation where government needs to recruit more teachers and decongest the classrooms. But here we are with government not being able to recruit these teachers. And it is because of these austerity measures. I know that because even within its own policy document, the Malawi Teacher Education Strategy, government has acknowledged this. Let me quote what is in the policy. This is what it's saying. The government treasury, with the recommendations from the IMF, are in the process of maintaining or minimizing the wage bill to an optimal level in line with sound financial management practices, but also give more space to other recurrent and capital expenditures. This is the case because the wage bill has been deemed very high, such that it may not spur economic growth and development. This is acknowledged in government's own policy document. And yet people outside are not aware, because in the study that I was doing, 90% of the respondents said they did not know about these IMF policies around the wage bill. So there has to be this awareness raising so that even the public are aware of the negative consequences of the policies of IMF and others on the education sector. 97% of my respondents told me that they believe that these wage bill policies have an adverse effect on the quality of education in the country. And when I interacted with the teachers told me a number of stories and experiences from the ground. Most of them said they are suffering heavy workload. And I agree with that, because if you look at the education statistics report of 2020, you have at least 10,000 teachers who are working in more than 2 classes. So you find a teacher teaching in standard 2, then standard 3, and even standard 4. This is really scary. And after that, you find that the teachers have no time to rest, and they cannot prepare even for the lessons from for the next day. One of the teachers, Yanko Mlamba, who is teaching at Lunzu Secondary School, said that the inadequate funding and also teacher shortage leads to a lack of proper preparation. And she says, this causes me and other teachers to teach at low standard and low quality, which brings about negative results in the schools. Moreover, there are other challenges such as poor salaries, which make it difficult to make ends meet at home. So these are real life experiences on the ground caused by the policies by IMF, World Bank, and others in the name of austerity. So I want to agree with the recommendation of the report that we need to ensure that we influence the IMF to review the current policies and reverse the policies that are harmful, that are negative towards the education sector as well as the other sectors. Because I want to agree that it doesn't make sense that we should cut expenditure on training and recruiting teachers just to make sure the economy well. I think this is nonsense in my view. And therefore, I would like to hear colleagues around the table who are saying that we need to change things and change must happen now. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nimani. We totally agree with you. It is time to review and reverse these policies which are negatively affecting our public service provision. It is unfortunate that we have gotten to that level where we are even indoctrinating the policies, including into our government policies, where we're saying, demonstrating our commitment to abide by those policies. And yet they have detrimental consequences on our public service. So at this point, I have the pleasure to introduce to you our last speaker on this section, Jason Bragaza, who happens to be the Executive Director for Afrodat. And after him, we'll cross to Tanzania. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you very much to comrades at ActionAid and Public Services International for the opportunity to speak at this very important launch of this report. I want to add one more R to Limbani's submission, and that third R is to reject the policies and that are deficiency driven in terms of how public services are being invested in and delivered. And the reject is to encourage our governments to reject policy advice that undermines effective public service delivery. And it is in that context that I will start my submission in terms of the report. The report, I welcome the report in terms of its timing. At a time when many African governments are beginning to receive further misleading technical advice around how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, but also accompanying that advice are conditionalities and requirements that put even more restrictive pressure on the ability of our governments to invest in social protection and the provision of social and public services in order to secure and buffer citizens from the effects of COVID-19. Earlier this year, when many comrades have been talking about the impact of education on our economies and in our region. When you look at the effect of COVID-19 and the amount of school closures that have taken place, you can only begin to imagine what that impact is going to have in the medium to the long term with regards to not only the recovery, but also the progress that had been achieved up until COVID-19. And so it is with that in mind, the statistics that I think the IMF had mentioned a few months ago, that the continent is losing is close to 500 billion is likely to be lost in the next few years as a result of missed education opportunities arising from school closures due to COVID-19. Now, if you couple that on with some of the findings from the report, but also some of the experiences that comrades have shared with us with regard to the disinvestment in education, the disinvestment in teacher training, then that figure is likely to actually increase quite significantly, if not exponentially. And that in itself creates a perpetual cycle then of the continent being in this dependency syndrome that we currently face ourselves in. And so with that, what the report also makes out very clear, or creates very clear in terms of opportunities, is that this is the time for our governments, this is the time for us as citizens to grab that mantle and reclaim our voice and reclaim our positions in the decision-making spaces. And with that in mind, something that Afrodad and Action Aid and other colleagues throughout this year have been working on is this rallying calling card called Making Africa a Rule Maker and Not a Rule Taker, as we look to build out of this COVID-19 pandemic. And as though many people are talking about building back better, what we are asking and what we are calling for is actually to build forward together as a united citizenry, as a united Africa with a common position on all of these issues, whether it is on debt, whether it is on austerity, whether it is on how to receive, internalize, and either accept or reject advice that undermines the ability to protect workers, to provide dignified jobs, to protect women and children, and to continue to provide adequate and appropriate investments in education that allow our economies to actually structurally transform as espoused in Agenda 2063. And comrades, this is what this report from a Afrodad perspective and from a Pan-African perspective, we have managed to take away and extract as part of our movement building, as part of our encouraging of citizens to support this sort of mantra, to encourage people to work with their governments, to work with parliamentarians, to really internalize the kind of advice that we're being given. And I just want to re-emphasize, advice is provided. If it is bad advice, nobody is under any obligation to take that advice. We are sovereign states, we are a sovereign continent, and therefore we can and should be able to say, no, we do not think this advice is appropriate for us. If the advice is good and it is consistent with what we want to see in our region and that will contribute to the betterment of our citizens and the betterment of our continent, then yes, we can take this advice. Throughout the day, a lot of comrades have spoken about how this has affected the ability for economies and governments to move forward. So it is incumbent upon us to use this report, to use the clarion call to make Africa a rule maker and not a rule taker, to then try and transform the manner in which our governments engage at the global level and at the continental level. And so I will humbly ask also, if it is okay with colleagues at PSI and Action Aid, if I may just drop the Harare Declaration, which is this clarion call to make Africa a rule maker and not a rule taker. If I can just drop that in the chat box as I conclude my submission. And just to say a great deal of appreciation for this report, because it does come at a time also when our governments have received some additional fiscal space through the issuance of special drawing rights. And it is so incumbent upon us as civil society, as citizen groups, to ensure those resources are actually used to deliver social protection, to deliver public services on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason, and we look forward to submission in the chat box. And thank you for your voice on this issue. And we are the third era, which is to reject the leading guidance. And and policies from IMF and who wants to put what we have been sharing in a form of a song, and she'll be singing live just behind me here, just for 2 minutes or so before we cross to ActionAid Tanzania. Set?
Yes.
Thank you. Over to you.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chisoma Mabunde, and I am an artist, a singer-songwriter, producer, amongst other things. Today, I will be sharing with you a song that has to do with the topic of discussion, coming from a perspective of an artist. We as artists also go through different challenges in as far as austerity is concerned. So I would like to give you this song, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I can't express how grateful I am to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much. I thought that we were about to get through this. Yeah. I thought that we were well on our way. I thought that we were about to beat this. Oh, yeah. But look at us now, we're right where we started. Oh, 2 steps forward, yeah, and 7 steps back. I thought that we conquered, but hell left their mark. Oh, how long will we go on like this? It's like every time we shoot, we miss. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. To get there's a struggle though. How long will we go on like this? It's like every time we shoot, we miss. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. To get there's a struggle though. So, social protection, a right that I lost to greed, to people who feel the need to feed on the little that I have, the little I struggle for, to people I chose to lead, people I thought I could believe, people I thought could lead me. Now I'm guilt-tripped into thinking that I am an ungrateful leech, for thinking and expecting more of these people. COVID-19 leaves me jobless. The situation is helpless. I try to start a business, and there you come with more taxes. Barely able to exist, but for some people, feel it's sensible to raise the prices of fuel. Expecting me to go above and beyond while you are content with the constant cons. Spare me. 2 steps forward, yeah, and 7 steps back. I thought that we conquered, but hell left their mark. Oh, how long will we go on like this? It's like every time we shoot, we miss. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. To get there's a struggle through, yeah. How long will we go on like this? It's like every time we shoot, we miss. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. To get there's a struggle though.
Thank you so much, Chisoma, for that beautiful presentation through a song. At this point in time, we are going to cross over to the northeastern part of Malawi, that's Tanzania, and I'm going to start by inviting Balozi Mora, the Tax Justice Advisor from Action Aid Tanzania, for his submission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members of the launching session. My name is Balozi from Action Aid Tanzania. I'm speaking from the desk of Tax Advisor. Thank you for all the past speakers for what they have already presented. Actually, I will build on what they have so far presented as findings and observation from their country perspectives. But from our end, our key message to IMF is that let the IMF stop governing resource allocation equation of other countries in a way which is actually distorting the meaning of livelihood and the future of the poor citizen. And we also urge our government to learn to say no and let them refrain from entertaining such intervention of external forces when it comes into resource allocation equation in the betterment of its people. I am speaking this because of what I have so far gathered from past speakers, but again, from the findings, research finding of the trend and impact assessment of public sector wage in Tanzania, we conclusively found that Tanzania it has been spending for more than a decade now, less and less public money on recurrent needs of the health and education sectors, something that has led to a cumulative crisis when it comes into accessibility, affordability, and the quality of provision of these public services, education and the healthy. Leave aside the so far a growing syndrome in the country that there is a growing cynicism or dissatisfaction of citizens over their government because the government have failed to show up that what are public services, okay? The government have been busy mobilizing taxes and the other resources from the citizens, but when it comes into delivery of these two critical services, people don't see anything, and therefore there is a growing cynicism and dissatisfaction that is more likely to jeopardize actually the Tanzania peace and the political stability that have been registered for quite decades of time. We found through government document development vision that the government of Tanzania have a very good on paper commitment and recognition of these two sectors in terms of how productive they are in propelling economic growth and development. That is on paper commitment, but when it comes into resource allocation equation, that commitment, on paper commitment, is not visible because there has been a declining trend in budget allocation, both in education and health sector, since the mid-19 up to now. And this has actually led to a cumulative crisis in healthy sector, especially few skilled healthy care staff to be overcrowded by patients. Our research has shown that one skilled doctor in a healthy care center is attending actually over 2,000 patients here in Tanzania. And when you go into education, one teacher in a less resourced classroom is handling over 100 pupils at the primary school level. And even the pupils themselves are deskless in the sense that most of the schools have no, just a basic desk of where the students sit and get the learning materials from the teacher. And when you go to the hospital as well, health issues of women are not adequately addressed to cover their needs. Half of the pregnant women who are going to hospital to give childbirth end up not being adequately attended by few available healthcare staff, and some of them end up losing their life, including the life of their children. And what is currently on the ground is that there is a growing pace of few staff who are employed in these two sectors wanting to drop or exit out from that employment because they don't see hope of salary increase or reduce the workload, because there has no any workforce expansion in the education sector, healthcare sector for a decade now, for a reason that is tied up by the government as cost-cutting measures. But what is puzzling is that you are cutting cost, but you are raising expenditure in paying external debt, because in Tanzania, the first item which is driving government expenditure is servicing of external debt, followed by public sector wage bill. But when you come into public sector wage bill, the proportion which is going into the healthy and the education sector yet is very, very small and insignificant. So that is our general observation, general findings, and the messages that we would like to send to both IMF and our country governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bolas, for sharing those observations from Tanzania on how austerity measures are impacting public service delivery in your country. At this point in time, I'd like to invite the Vice President of Tanzania Teachers Union, that's Madam Dina, who is going to talk for about 5 minutes exactly. Thank you so much. Madam Dina, are you around?
I'm not sure if she's around.
All right.
Yep.
The next speaker, that's Minister of Finance, the Senior Public Policy Official, Mr. Hoja.
That one is not around, and the next one, Director of Economic Policy, is not around.
All right, so we can just conclude the discussion with Minister of Health, Abel Makumbi. Is he around?
I think we should just move on to a broader discussion now. Any questions? I'll leave it over to you. You have another 10 minutes. I'm open to discussion.
Thank you so much. I think it's now time for it's a plenary session. I invite questions, comments based on the that we have had in Tanzania, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. I recognize a hand from Limbani Sapato.
Yeah, thanks for recognizing my hand. I think we have all discussed the challenges that are being caused by these policies by the IMF. I think which are aimed at ensuring that countries are in sound economic standing. I think that as the activists, we also need to seem to suggest alternatives. Now, in terms of how can countries grow their economy, and I think from the report being launched, I've seen a number of innovative suggestions in mobilizing resources, including also suggestions around good public finance management in the countries. So, for example, in Malawi, I've done a study on what alternative strategies could be there. We have, for example, the pension fund. We have idle pension fund, which is in trillions now in Malawi. That could have been used for infrastructure projects, for example. But also, we've been talking of an education levy, which could enhance the budget. Like in Zimbabwe, they did a health HIV levy of 3%. We have in Malawi a TVET levy of 1%, but we could upgrade that to 3% so that we can raise
We can't hear you, but probably we can hear from Dr. Kabira, who has a comment, and I'll get back to you if your network gets back to normal.
Resources.
Thank you so much.
Okay, listening to the brilliant presentations that have been made, I just wanted to underline that following neoliberalism will really cripple our ability to implement affirmative action policies. And without having affirmative action policies, we're going to have a public service that is not gendered, and that is a sure way to not attain Agenda 2063. In other words, if we are to review, reverse, and reject neoliberalism, and reject these policies, we are definitely getting to increase the participation of women in developmental projects. The other thing I wanted to add is access to the internet, which is very urgent in terms of education, is going to be very, very key if it is budgeted against. And this is not going to happen. Austerity actually stops the public sector from African governments delivering. This is very key to women, because when a political party gets into government and they fail, for example, here in Malawi, we promised them to create 1 million jobs. The question is, how would you create 1 million jobs when you have signed up to not employing beyond a certain threshold, 30%? Now, what that will do is very soon the people will rise and say, you guys are failures. Even Parliament itself is there. We see that they go there and they fail to reverse this. In other words, I'm saying neoliberalism is also a governance problem, because it makes political parties or governments fail to do what the people want them to do by its very design. I would say this is an important part for me to say today, a day when we are marking Thomas Sankara's, getting a statue on his name. Why am I mentioning him? I'm saying neoliberalism is by design designed to underdevelop Africa. This is a fact, and we need to know that it's not an accident, that the countries that are suffering from this are really from Africa. So if we look at the political question that neoliberalism is trying to resolve, in other words, it is a weapon to keep Africans as the first world, if possible. I think they would like to see us 14th world or even 15th world. I don't think third world is adequate. So in my opinion, we need to get rid, boot out austerity, not just because of its impact to the poor, but to save our own self as a race, as a people, This is not something that we can do as a part-time. It has to be a 24/7 job because it is designed to keep us. Look, there's a reason why the discussions are secret. There's a reason why you find that those who don't adhere to it are actually punished. If this was a democratic thing, we would be debating about it. But you don't debate. It's either you're told it's either our way or the highway. And whoever tries to be funny along the way is admonished, faster than they can even spell their name. I'm saying that the removal of austerity from our budget is a political question. It is the right fighting with the left, as clear as all that. And it is time our civil society, our women's groups, our governments, our MPs understood that to be African is something that has been used as a feast for those who believe in white supremacy. So as far as I'm concerned, it is not a joke, and the bodies of women are the ones that are used to construct this global capitalism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kabila, for those sentiments. And I think the message from our Feminist Macroeconomic Alliance is very clear. We say, put out hostility before our vote puts you out. So very clearly, I want to cross over to Zimbabwe and hear from Evelyn. And that will be probably the last comment for this session. And then I'm going to pass over the mic to Increment, who is going to close the session. Thank you so much, Evelyn. Hey, Chip. Yes.
Yeah, you're saying Zimbabwe, so I was not really sure. Okay, in terms of way forward, in terms of dealing with the neoliberal policies, the IMF and other Bretton Woods organizations, including the powers behind them, should actually think, first of all, of ensuring that there's tax justice. By ensuring that multinational corporations actually pay their fair share of taxes in Africa. We know that Africa is a place where they extract every minerals they need, but they never pay any taxes. So instead of pushing for austerity measures, they should actually be pushing for every multinational corporation to actually pay their fair share of taxes. Also relook and rethink in terms of the free trade agreements they make African countries to actually sign that limit the policy space for the governments. And also finally, they should also bring on board the Africans in terms of the current minimum tax, global tax that is being discussed at global level. That are alternatives to austerity measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment, Evelyn. Maybe before we wrap up, there's one more comment that we want to hear from the Executive Director for ActionAid. And I'll also ask David if you have a statement or two to make as we wrap up. So at this point in time, let me ask my colleague Rodney to make a statement or two.
Thank you very much, everyone. I really want to appreciate the discussion that have taken place, and I hope the fire that has been ignited today will continue to burn over time until the 3 R's are achieved. I wanted also to draw the attention of the contributors to some few factors as to what tools is IMF and World Bank using to perpetrate their power over the African states. I think there are, from the discussion, there are 3 things that I've noted. Number 1 is to ensure that poverty continues among our people so that we continue to beg from them for the little support that we get with a lot of conditions. Number 2 is to make sure that there's an information blackout. We have already stated that most of the discussions between IMF and our governments is in closed doors so that we don't know what is happening. Number 3, I think it is also an issue of divide and rule, where they will bring cross purposes between those who are governing and those who are not governing, the opposition against those who are in government. Now, if this discussion ignores that perspective and to think that only the advocacy can achieve much, I think we're missing some key points And I wanted to draw attention also to what is the role of our regional blocks, like the SADC, the COMESA, the African Union, in all this kind of discussion. Can these people start to talk on our behalf as one unit so that we're able to win this war against the IMF and the World Bank? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodney, for that input, and I think it's taken care of, well noted. Over to you, David. You want to make a statement or two?
Well, I really only want to, at this point, thank all of our colleagues in Malawi for a beautifully curated and chaired session from Eastern Southern Africa. Thank you very much to colleagues also in Zimbabwe and Tanzania, and from Public Services International, Education International. This is now, we come at the end of this segment, and we'll be starting the international segment of the launch in 13 minutes from now. So please, I think those of you who are part of the next segment, we'll have a short sort of pause now as we set up and prepare the panelists for the international launch. So we'll be starting that in about 12 minutes. Let's just thank you again to everyone, and really, really wonderful presentations, speeches, beautiful creative inputs as well. Thank you to everyone. So slight pause, and then we'll be getting back together again shortly. Please stay online, particularly if you are part of the international launch. Presenters for the international launch hopefully are now online. After we've done the that's happening in starting about 12 minutes. We'll be hearing from Rosa from the General International. We have Haldis from Education International. I can see you rejoined us. We have Isabel Ortiz, who thank you for joining us as well. Bhumika hopefully will be with us as well. We'll be starting that shortly. So I think I'm going to hand over to the tech people who are just going to check that everything is set up okay. So over to the tech people.